I see trees of green.
Well, good morning everybody. My name's Ron. I have a bush block in Flowerdale and I'm now a townie in Yea. So I still have those two properties, so I fluctuate between the two. A couple of admissions to make before I start this talk. I have absolutely no qualifications in what I'm talking about. As my bio said, I've got a background in nuclear physics. And when you think about biodiversity and nuclear physics, there's not much relationship there unless you want to eliminate biodiversity, in which case I'm your man. I can do that really easily. I guess this is my qualification. This is Ron Litjens, age 8, and I think it's fair to say I was obsessed with insects for the first decade and a half of my life. Absolutely obsessed. My whole time was spent chasing them, collecting them. So this is me with my butterfly net, my tadpole box, and my bug catcher with the magnifying glass in the top. It was a pretty high tech one. So I've spent a lifetime of, I guess, watching. So I call myself an amateur naturalist, very enthusiastic, but no quals that go with that. The other admission I'd like to make is I've planted a lot of vegetation in my life, but never have done it for a dollar value. So I guess my experience is really getting stuff in the ground, but without much thought about what's the dollar return for me. So that sort of is a little bit at odds probably to the audiences sitting here now. So when Rita first approached me about participating in this talk, I said, well, what do you want to talk about? Biodiversity is pretty big. And she said, this is directly from her email. I want to talk about different vegetation structures, what species you find in them, trees and understory, open woodlands, single paddock trees, plantation plots, and the respective biodiversity of value of birds, insect species, tips what property holders and farmers do to support the species. So in the 4 hours and 53 minutes left, I have to cover this. That's how long it would take. What I want to do basically is to talk a little bit about what biodiversity is, and then talk about how anybody, whether it's someone who's growing trees or just doing biodiversity plots, what they can do to their land to attract insects and other biodiversity. And I'm not going to talk about any dollar value at all. Right, so this is simply from the biodiversity point of view. So I've called the talk Habitat Friendly Tree Farming. I realise that you may want to replace tree farming with plantations or veggie gardens or whatever you want to do. Swap tree farming with whatever suits your values and what you're trying to get out of your planting. The information will be of general nature only. Please read the PDS before you take any action. And because I've got to get the word biodiversity in there, I couldn't work it out. I've got saying this. So species have been in decline worldwide for a long time, and it's ever increasing. Australia has got a very, very poor record in terms of trying to save species. And it's not as if we haven't put land aside. We've got national parks, and we've got state forests, and we've got conservation reserves. In fact, we have a high percentage of our land is actually locked up into this stuff, and yet our species is still declining. So we need to do things in a different way, and one of the ways you need to do that is to look at our vast agricultural landscapes and try and integrate biodiversity into our agricultural systems. And that's what I'll be trying to do today. So a quick mention about what biodiversity is. I thought I'd put that up there because I'm a fan of Michael Unick. This is Victoria's state bird emblem, if you don't know. But if it looks like that, then we're in Victoria. Okay, so what is biodiversity? When most people think about biodiversity, they think about species richness. So, we have a diverse biodiversity on our farm because we've got 13 species of birds or 57 species of birds. But biodiversity really is much more than that. Not only is it the number of species you have, but it's also how are they arranged in time and space in a landscape, and also what function are they doing. Biodiversity is also, most people think about above ground biodiversity, and I would suggest that below ground biodiversity is probably as important, if not more important, to the whole ecological system. Because in the below ground is where you get cycles, your nutrient cycles, your water cycles, your carbon cycles, all your soil, all that type of stuff happens with the biodiversity that happens below ground. So it's far more complex than maybe you originally realised, and a lot of it is hard to see. It's very easy to count birds and say we've got 15 birds, but it's hard to count worms or nematodes or something and say, gee, we've got 16 varieties of worms on our property. That's hard to actually do. I got reacquainted with biodiversity after the 2009 bushfires. I moved up to my bush block in Flowerdale 2 weeks before the 09 fires. And to say my first month at Flowerdale was a trial by fire would be exactly right. That's exactly what it was. It was a trial by fire because the block where I was didn't stop burning for a month. What came out of the fires was there's a lot of money, as you know, given to various communities to get them on their feet again. And I was a member of the Creek Landcare group, and we got a chunk of money to do something called Focus on Fauna, which was a citizen science biodiversity program to monitor how the biodiversity was coming back into fire damaged landscapes. And so what the project was about, we gave 25 property holders motion sensing cameras and audio recording equipment, and said, right, go out there and record what's coming back. And then we set up a website where we could actually compare what we were seeing, so the community could sort of say, you know, we saw a koala or whatever. My property here is number 13. It got smacked pretty badly. We saved the house, but everything else was totally trashed, including all the bush. And there was nothing but black for ages. But what I did notice was there was a grove of 13 yellow box saplings growing about 300 metres down from the house. And given I wasn't getting any kangaroos and nothing that the other people were getting, I thought what I'll do is I'll watch this group of saplings and see what comes to this little patch of green in this black landscape. And that started a project, which it was just a personal project, of actually watching this grove of saplings for 7 years until it got too high for me to actually watch it anymore because the tree was up here. I just want to show you just briefly some of the stuff that came to the grove. So I grouped them into not the nice topics that you do, like predators and things. I group them into leaf chewers and sapsuckers. So leaf chewers. So this is a 4-spotted cup moth, Dorytifera quadriculata. And this is the caterpillar it produces, brightly coloured. Interesting thing, this caterpillar has evolved to have no legs, and when you annoy it, four mounds that come from the top of its head there, and out of those mounds come out red spikes, and those spikes are actually cylinders filled with irritant liquid. And if you touch it, those spikes break, you get the irritant liquid on your hands. Not so much designed for scaring off humans, but certainly other predators. This is the pattern they make on leaves once the eggs hatch. And I saw 7 Dorytifera species. This one here has 8 turrets which pop out. So all different colours, amazing type animals. The gum leaf skeletonizer moth, right, lays eggs, and this is what the caterpillars do. They cruise the top of the leaf and take the top layer off, and then they go on the bottom of the leaf and take the bottom layer off. And if you know when you've been walking in the bush, you find a gum leaf and it's a pure skeleton. It's just beautiful. This is the bugger that does it. Right? They have these little, when they molt, the head capsule remains attached to the head. So you can tell how old those caterpillars are by how many capsules are sitting on top of their head. Emperor gum moth caterpillars, used to be hundreds around when I was a kid. Rarely see them now, but they're still in the landscape. White stemmed gum moth caterpillars. The beetles get a look in. These are chrysomelid beetles or eucalyptus beetles or leaf beetles. Many different species, all different coloured. This is the patterns that the young make on the leaf. They just totally eat the leaf and there's nothing left. This is the pattern that the adults do. So the adults just cut out semicircles out of the leaf margin. So you can actually look at the patterns on the leaf and you can actually work out what biodiversity is actually sitting in your planting. Scarabs of different sorts. This is the pattern they make to your leaf. And then there's a group of insects called hemipteras. They're sap suckers. So you don't want to say that too fast. Sap suckers. So the thing about hemiptera, for most hemipteras, is they sit on a tree and they suck sap, obviously, right? But out of the sap, what they want to extract is the protein. But because eucalyptus sap in particular has got such a high sugar content, they have to suck a lot of sap every day to get the protein requirements. In fact, they suck so much sap that it's bigger than their body weight. So basically what happens is they're sucking sap, but out their back end comes almost pure sugar. So it's almost like a continuous cycle. So what you'll find with sap suckers, like these gum tree hoppers, of which there are probably, I think I counted up, 12 different varieties on my 13 saplings, is they suck sap and they extrude sugar. And of course the ants have realised this, so the ants actually wait at the back of the gum tree hopper and take the sugar. Right? So there's been this relationship developed between the sap suckers and ants. So the ants look after the sap suckers and protect them from parasites and predators, and in return the ants get the sugar that comes out the back. So gum tree hoppers, and different species of gum tree hoppers have different species of ants that look after them. All right, so I don't know what species is. I call this the bronze-headed gum tree hopper. I just made that up. But here you've got bronze-headed adults, you've got the nymphs, and you've got sugar ants look after this particular type of gum tree hopper. There's a little critter called a psyllid. So this creature is about 3 millimetres long. Looks like a very small cicada. So the picture on the left is a psyllid who's just laid eggs, and the picture on the right is a baby psyllid. So a baby psyllid is a sapsucker. It's a hemiptera. And what it does with the extruded sugar is it builds a house to protect itself with. And that house is called a lerp. Right? Now, depending on the species of psyllid, you'll get different types of lerps. All right, so this is a sugar lerp, so it's sort of like a conical pyramid. You've got lace lerps, which look like scallops. You've got white clam lerps. And you can see that where the house is, the leaf underneath has gone brown because it's actually basically sucking the sap out of the leaf below. So, none of this stuff is, from a Costa Rica or anything. You can walk out into any forest, probably not this time of the year, and you'll see all these creatures in all the gum trees if you know what you're looking for. The interesting thing about psyllids is that birds such as pardalotes feed exclusively on the house, the lerp. That's what they feed on. That's their food source. So when you talk about specialist birds and relationships with specialist interests, pardalotes feed on the house to such an extent they have evolved a groove in their beak so they can actually pick off the lerp without damaging the psyllid underneath. Right, so the psyllid is there watching television or whatever it does in its house, and all of a sudden, where's my bloody house gone? And then it starts producing another house. So in effect, the pardalotes are actually farming psyllids for the lerp. The other bird which has a relationship with psyllids is the bellbird, or the bell miner. 90% of their food source comes from psyllids and lerps. So they don't care, they take the house and the psyllid and everything. You'll see, I saw, this is called a scale insect. So once again, this is made of sugar. The female scale insect lives in this cocoon its whole life. And you can see little glints of sugar coming out of the hole. So from that hole they extrude sugar. From that hole they mate. So the males actually mate through that hole as well. And once again, looked after by ants. The eucalyptus tip wilter bug, right? And guess what it does? It wilts the tips of eucalyptus trees. So this is the pattern you'll see if you've got these around. And it wasn't until year 6 that I got a non-invertebrate resident in this sapling, and by this time the saplings were about 2 metres high. Got our first bird nesting. Okay, now these saplings were sort of waving in the wind. They weren't pretty strong, but straight at Thornbull got them there as well. So, you know, this is what I saw over a 7-year period, and I present this talk. It's an hour and a half called Life in a Box, right? But it's probably, I think I identified 125 species over that time period of things that actually are living in the box. Now I get a kick out of photographing things, but I get a better kick out of actually identifying what I photograph. Now for birds it's easy, for insects it's a little more difficult, but I've been helped out by this book I just downloaded from the web called Healthy Hardwoods, a Guide to Pests, Diseases and Nutritional Disorders. And all those animals are listed in this book. Now I have a bit of a problem with it in that I don't think these are pests. This is biodiversity and action, right? Because my philosophy on life, particularly whether it's tree planting or veggie gardening, is if something's not eating your plants, then your plot's not part of the ecosystem, right? And I would suggest that these animals are not pests, or they are pests because you haven't got a balanced biodiversity ecosystem sitting there. Because what this book doesn't cover is that there's a whole lot of predators out there which will knock off these pests in a balanced system. You know, you've got any range of insects. So the assassin bug is a hemiptera. It's a sucking insect, and it sucks sap-sucking insects. All right, so it's a carnivore, and it just wanders up to any sap-sucking insect and just sucks it to death. You've got any range of wasps. Wasps are huge predators of insects and pests. Any number of birds, more predatory insects, robber flies, the terminators insect world. They'll go around, they'll take anything on the wing. And this is actually taken in the grove. This is a scorpion fly. It's neither a scorpion nor is it a fly. But it sat there all day, and these are the larvae of a eucalyptus beetle, and it just hung there. They're called hang flies because they've got long legs, and it just sat there picking off, eating them, picking off, eating it. And by the end of the day, that population of pests was gone, right? If you have the predators there as well. So, how do you increase biodiversity? Well, for those who've been around long enough and dabbled in psychology, you may remember Maslow's triangle, right? This is Maslow's triangle about what motivates humans, right? I think developed in mid-1940s, and if you did psychology around when I sort of dabbled in it, this was all the rage, and it still has some benefits when you look at it that way. But this is supposed to just explain how humans are motivated. Well, if you want to understand what attracts people to your plot of vegetation, you've got to think like a bird, or think like a millipede, or think like a grasshopper, right? And I use the same thing, the same triangle, right? I call it Ron's hierarchy of needs. Right? But it's the same, when you think it's the same thing. What do insects, birds, any biodiversity need? They need food, they need water, they probably need warmth, they need rest, they need security, they need safety. I'm not going to talk about intimate relationships between insects. I'm not going to talk about fulfilling their esteem needs, but at a basic level, if you can provide all this for the biodiversity that you want in your plot, then you're on the right track. Because if you don't have this, they're not going to turn up. If they turn up, they're not going to stay. No, because you know, if you have biodiversity in your plot, this is what they'll be doing. They'll be eating, they'll be drinking, they'll be having some recreation time, they'll be doing some parenting, and they'll be sleeping and they'll be sheltering, and they need the conditions to do all of that for them to stay. So you need to think like the animals to get that to happen. So how do you improve biodiversity? Well, this is the only chart I'm going to put up. Biodiversity takes time. Right, you may plan a plot, but for it to become truly biodiverse, it takes time to do that. It takes planning on your part, it takes vision on your part, and it takes consistency of purpose over the long haul. Because a tree just doesn't grow, it takes time to do that. And if you look at how long it takes habitat resources to get established, you know it's on a longer time frame, right? Canopy cover, 5 years onwards. Good leaf litter layer or bark structures, 10 years onwards. Tree hollows, 50 years onwards, all right? So we're talking about long time scale stuff. However, and also you need, really, to have viable populations, you need landscape sized changes. And we don't all have landscapes to donate to that. But small areas can be very effective in promoting biodiversity as well. And this example here is a beef farmer in Limestone, just around the corner here. Judy, she took over the family farm. It's steep hills country, and she's been replanting biodiversity corridors. So not for dollars, but just for biodiversity. This was a gully she planted in 1996. It's an erosion gully. It's about 8 metres deep. It's huge, and she's planted it with mixed native vegetation. And I'm a member of the Murrindindi Bird Watchers, and we volunteer to go in there every quarter for BirdLife Australia and do surveys of surveys of the birds in particular, because birds are good bioindicators because they're easy to count. And in the beginning, where there was no vegetation here, you had what I call the bully birds, the ones that are quite open about standing in open pasture and saying, come and get me. Magpies, crows, corellas, cockatoos. And this is what it looks like now. It's quite diverse and a number of very complex from a structural point of view, and all the woodland birds have returned, or a great proportion of them. Right, so we go in there now and we see weebills and thornbills and wrens and all the little things that people like to see flitting around their gardens. Strath Creek Landcare Group, once again, they've done a biodiversity project, right? So they realised they couldn't do landscape landscape scale changes, but what they did was they got a whole lot of landowners together and put together a joint project for funding. So these landowners, which are scattered through the King Parrot Creek Valley, some are looking to do woodlots. This is also a steep hill country. Some wanted to do steep hills, some wanted to do erosion cover, some wanted to do simply just biodiversity plantings. Put the whole project together and got funding through the government and the GBCMA. And the thing about this is, now you've got spots of biodiversity happening, but you've got people who can talk to each other and share ideas and help each other. So it becomes more of a community type thing as well. One thing you got going for you is that Mother Nature is tenacious, all right? Unless you start kicking her in the guts too often, she'll come back and she'll come back and she'll come back. So if you're putting up trees and vegetation, she will be there. So if we look at birds, for example, as you decrease the canopy cover in a landscape, birds will start declining. We all know that, right? Depending on the species of the bird, that decline will take a different trajectory. So if you take parrots and things, for example, as tree cover decreases, the parrot population will decrease. Just fly long distances somewhere else. It's pretty straightforward. The tipping point for tree cover in Australian woodland birds is around about 10-15% tree cover. If you get below 15%, bad things start happening. For some species, such as grey shrike thrushes and some of the whistlers, after 15%, the decline is not linear anymore, it starts dropping off quite dramatically. For birds such as diamond firetails and red-capped robins, below 15%, they're gone. There's no rapid decline or curved decline, they just disappear from the landscape. And I particularly want to talk about this because Mother Nature is tenacious, and the example that I want to show you is the Euroa arboretum. Now, Euroa arboretum is, I think, 27 hectares. In 1990, Vic Roads, who were doing the Euroa bypass for the Hume Highway, said to the council, we have a totally trashed gravel dumping site here, we don't need any more, here you go, it's yours. Right? And some people in the community said, well, we could actually do something with this. It's got oil on it, it's had trucks parked on it, it's had gravel dumped on it. Let's build an arboretum. Go figure. And the council said, off you go, build the arboretum. So this is a picture of the Euroa arboretum. Oh, you can't see it, 1996. I started working for the arboretum in 2015 and I had a drone, and they said, wouldn't it be good for you to send a drone up? So this was taken from a light aircraft. Send a drone up and see if you can get the similar type of picture of what the arboretum looks like now. So that's the picture I got, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the tree, that's what they've done with the tree cover. They're trying to reproduce grassy woodland EVC. And guess what? The diamond firetail, which hadn't been around for decades, has suddenly reappeared. And I was there last month, and it'd be an exaggeration to say they're like sparrows, but you don't have to walk very far and they are everywhere. They've come back. The other interesting thing is the Euroa Arboretum used to get a lot of funding to regenerate the Euroa guinea flower, which is an endangered species in that district. Very few and far between, so they wanted to grow it and propagate it. As part of their grassland project, they scalped a wide part of the arboretum. They took 10 centimetres off the whole ground cover to remove the phosphorus nitrogen layer and to remove the weed layer, and then they replanted with grassland species to try and develop a new grassland. And when you go there, it is magnificent. But guess what? The weediest thing that has come up, and it wasn't planted, is the Euroa guinea flower. It is back, and it is back with a vengeance. And they didn't have any seeds for it. It was just sitting there ready for the right conditions. So Mother Nature is on your side to help you. Connectivity is everything. Lots of little creatures will not cover open ground, right? And some of that open ground could be 50 metres, right? Either because they physically can't, it's too much, or they psychologically can't, they don't want to. It's just too dangerous to do that. I'm talking about small wrens, I'm talking about small reptiles, they just won't do that. So connectivity is everything. To give you an example, this is not a dollar example, this is a biodiversity example. The Creek Landcare Group started in 1973, has had a single-minded focus of revegetating the King Parrot Creek. That's been their sole focus for all that time. And this is a program called Creek Link, where you can actually map how you're doing with that. So this is the Creek Landcare Group boundary. This is the King Parrot Creek. This is the Queen Parrot Creek. Green means we've totally fenced off the riparian zone to exclude stock, and over 80% of the vegetation in that area is native. Yellow means we've either totally excluded stock out or 80% of the vegetation is native. Red means we've got a farmer who wants to get in on the action, is sympathetic to the cause and, you know, ready to go. And white means we either haven't assessed that waterway or the owner is not on board at all. So, but you can see in that time, the King Parrot Creek from Cooner's Bridge, which is the border with Flowerdale, all the way, this is Strath Creek here, all through there, totally fenced off. And we have a biodiversity corridor. Things are moving up and down because animals have to move seasonally, daily, for mating purposes. They have to move. And if we take a bigger look at this thing here, this area here, this is the property. All this is a property called Three Sisters, owned and run by Terry and Janet Hubbard. Since Terry and Janet bought the property, this is Steep Hills country, they've been planting out their waterways, and you can see he's developed a biodiversity corridor all through his property, which links to the pine plantation at the back, which links to Mount Disappointment State Forest. And he thought, wouldn't it be great if we could link it to the King Parrot Creek biodiversity corridor? The holdout person was here, right? So the animals that are travelling here, you can see them travelling here. The holdout person was here, so we finally got this plot of land. They donated it to us, planted it 4 years ago, mixed native vegetation, and now we've got this linked to Mount Disappointment. So we're developing a huge biodiversity corridor. This is now linked here. This is Vicky's property. Vicky planted all these trees here, and that's now linked here as well. Unfortunately, one of our measures is how much roadkill is it on the road here, because they got to cross the Broadford Flowerdale Road, and the roadkill has gone up enormously. But I take heart in that in a strange sort of way, because it means that the thing is working. So connectivity, what can you do? Retain patches of remnant forest, locate plantings close to native forest. If you've got a planting, join it to the native forest, because you know the biodiversity will leak in whether you want to or not. Locate plantings in parts of the landscape where restoration is needed, erosion maybe. When you're planning your planting and harvesting cycles, see if you can actually maintain connectivity. Right? If you've got to harvest something, don't chop part of your plantation off from another part. Try and maintain that connectivity. Plant in polygons, not strips. Need to cater for all tastes. You just got to look at the shape of birds' beaks to know that, you know, we've got honey eaters, we've got seed eaters, we've got insectivores, we've got carnivores. You need to cater for all those animals, right? Both from a food point of view and a security point of view. Small birds need to hide in dense foliage. They get beaten up by magpies and things. They need to have dense foliage. So not just trees, you need understory, prickly understory, dense understory. We know that for woodland birds you need probably about a dozen different woody species to bring a woodland bird population back. Include rough-barked species too. All right, so this is a white-throated tree creeper. If the bark is rough, it'll be there. Right, it will be circling up the tree, and circling down the tree will be the Satella. Right, same ecological niche, but when you look at it from below or above, it's different. The bark looks different. They can get different animals. Encourage what are generally regarded as pest species, but are important to the landscape: cherry ballards, mistletoes, and increase ground flora to increase parasitoid insects such as wasps, which are really important for controlling pests. Plant or allow natural understory. This is the complexity that Zara talked about for different reasons, but this is for biodiversity. Add artificial hollows until natural ones occur. 50, 80 years until a natural hollow occurs. We've got Australian birds are hollow breeders. You know, we've got arboreal mammals which live in hollows. This is a nest box at my place. It was a parrot nest box, but for the past 11 years, on a cyclic basis, I've had white-throated tree creeper lives in it in spring, Alec nightjar lives in it in summer, and over winter, possums live in it. And it just cycles through that all the time, right? Build it and they will come. And you know, in bold, leave the leaf litter and the bark litter in situ to increase structural diversity and to help the diversity that happens below the ground. Keep out the ferrules. They may look cute, it may look beautiful, we don't want them. That's enough said on that. And lastly, and this is really important, you need to monitor your process, your progress. And it's important to do that for a number of reasons. A, just because you've planted something and done all the right things doesn't mean it's going to work. So you need to keep looking at it and sort of making changes you can, or understanding what it means in your landscape. And B, if you've got a large project which is taking years, you need to be able to look back and say, I remember when the saplings were this big, right? Like with any large project, because this project will always be going on and on and on, you'll be looking to the future, it's good to step back and say, remember when we planted that, just for your own peace of mind. So photo points, survey sites, flora and fauna surveys, get the local birdos in, get the local naturalists in, the local field groups, get them to help you. Motion sensing cameras, you'll be amazed what they will pick up. This has taken a bird bath at my house in Flowerdale. This is a brush-tailed phascogale, which is supposed to be endangered in Flowerdale. They're like rabbits, really, and they're all over the place. You'll also maybe see, which is what picked up in Flowerdale, was you'll see your neighbour with his bow and arrow walking through your property, hunting deer, right? But more importantly than that, he didn't have any shoes on, and he didn't have any clothes on either. And above all, publicise this, okay? I mean, you need to get everybody involved because people love critters, right? I don't think there's anybody around who is interested in wildlife. And I wanted to finish on an inspiring note, and I didn't have one, so I went to John F. Kennedy, and I've modified one of his famous sayings, right? Ask not what biodiversity can do for you, but what can you do for biodiversity?
You mentioned the birds before. Do you know why they tend to target red gums mainly?
I'm not sure they do. I know this. I think it depends where you live.
Oh.
Because if there's no red gum in your district, I'll get the same question from somebody saying, do you know why those bloody lerps are targeting my narrow-leaf peppermints? I think they're equal opportunity feeders. They certainly attack red gums because anyone who's driven from Yea to Seymour in the last 2 years will notice all those red gums along the Golden Valley Highway there are brown. There's not a green leaf there. There's a lerp infestation there. It cycles. There's not, and trees won't die, but you know things come in cycles. Maybe your leaves are too sweet.
There was a question, Peter.
Hey Ron, what role do you see a conflagration the size of the Kinglake fires playing? Do you see it as a phasal reset in the whole system because it might be getting out of balance at some stage? I was there on the day like you probably were.
Yeah.
The first thing that came to my mind was, the country's rebirthing. That was the first thing that came to my mind with a fire that size.
And in many ways, I mean, I think, like with most natural disasters, there's good and bad points for both the human population and for biodiversity as well. It certainly wiped out a lot of biodiversity. I mean, if you look at the King Parrot Creek Valley, which was just smashed, and it was on my property. Anything bigger than that, smaller than that, was just disappeared. It just vaporised, right? And it took probably 2.5 years before I even got grass cover back. Everything was gone.
But
So
that's the mindset we place on it because it's a great long phasal step.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
But what I have to say is the grass didn't come back, but there were native species which did come back, which we had never seen in a district forever. We had, Wallenbergia. We had Wallenbergias, which is a common plant, but not in our district, right? And we had the crop of chocolate lilies and bulbine lilies the year after the fires was just extraordinary, right? So even though it trashed a lot of biodiversity, as I said, Mother Nature is tenacious. She will come back, and she will come back with a vengeance. And I think certainly for the King Parrot Creek, which was at the time blackberry infested, it took out all the blackberries, right? And they haven't come back. The native vegetation has come back, and we have a very beautiful creek in that valley now. So it's a mixed bag, but I like the rebirth idea because a lot of things came back which we hadn't seen before.
There's a question here and then one here. Sarah.
So Ron, you might have a comment on this as well, but one of the theories around that lerp infestation with red gums, especially on roadsides, is because those birds might be missing.
Yep.
You know, some of the natural predators of feeders on lerp, especially along roadways, might be discouraged from feeding in those areas. So that's just one theory. Yeah, it'd be interesting if you've got thoughts on that as well.
Well, I mean, you know, nature is a balance, and when there's out of balance, you'll get things like the lerp infestation. I think along roadsides, you're exactly right. Heavy trucks and cars just tend to scare wildlife away from road reserves, and even though they might be floristically really, really good, you know, you've got all sorts of things on road reserves. I think from a wildlife point of view, if they're not scared off, they're run over. So you're right, we'll knock out a whole lot of predators.
I do have a question, but Vicky was first.
Ron, a few slides back you I think you were suggesting that, and the name of the thing's gone out of my head, you know, where you get that growth attached to a tree. That
Mistletoe.
Mistletoe. That's a positive. I had the understanding that that was a negative on a tree.
I think with anything, if it's out of balance, it's a negative. And I've seen trees in this district even, which is almost all mistletoe. That's not good, right? But mistletoe is, you know, it's like this comment about insects are pests. In the right balance, in fact, it's its own little ecosystem in itself. There are things that live in mistletoe which only live in mistletoe. And if you say, well, mistletoe's a pest, I think when it's out of control, it's a pest. But in a balanced ecosystem, it's just one element which is part of the whole system.
And the second thing, you had two of those.
Cherry
things
ballard.
mentioned. Yes. What is that?
Cherry ballard is it looks like a conifer, but it actually grows from the roots of other plants. So it's parasitic to another plant. In fact, they're all over the landscape. In fact, do you have cherry ballards on this property?
No.
You don't? Okay.
It'll be in the Bush Foods book.
Yeah, I mean they're all over the landscape, and once you it should be in the Bush Foods book. But once you recognise the distinctive colour green, if you knew, you could drive home and go, "There's a cherry ballard." I mean they're everywhere.
Right.
Once again, you can't propagate them because they sort of propagate from the roots of other trees, and so nursery you can't buy them in a nursery, but. I'm saying let them grow. They're not all bad.
Sue has a question.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks, Ron. That was really great as usual. You talked about the Aurora arboretum.
Yes.
You said they sculpt 10 centimetres. Did you say?
Yes.
It's interesting that the seed was still below that.
Well,
if it's come back without any help, I wonder what the depth would be. But that's great. That actual process, isn't it?
Well, it was an experimental process. They were trying to rejuvenate what was a pasture land and then a gravel dump into a natural grassland. And they actually sampled, right? So they sampled for depth-wise for phosphorus and nitrogen from the farming phase
that's how they got
to get rid of that. That's how they worked out the depth. Yeah. And they also sampled for weed seed. How deep was the weed seed, right? So, and they worked out that in most places it was 10 centimetres, which when you think about, if you take 10 centimetres off a hectare, you can imagine how much soil that is. So now they've got mounds in the arboretum, which is probably the highest point in Euroa. I mean, but you know, all the weed seeds, it's all buried in the mound, and they replanted the mounds.
Yeah.
So they took 10 centimetres off, which is a huge undertaking. I'm not recommending that you do that, but that was the experiment that they did, and they just replanted with all the grassland native seed, which they have plenty of because that's their business. And it was just amazing what came up, as well as all the grassland natives was the Euroa guinea flower just sprang to life. So
it's an interesting method.
It is, yeah, but not for everybody. Get a D9 through your backyard.
I have a question with regards to weed spraying.
Yes.
I'm sort of not sure what to think about that. And when I did my chemical course and asked the question, what's the half-life of different chemicals in the soil, I did not get any answers. So how do we deal with that blackberry conundrum? What do you guys do at King Lake, like at the King Creek, King Parrot Creek, in your land care group? What's your policy there?
I'll go back to my disclaimer at the very beginning. I look at all this from a biodiversity point of view. I have really never had any interest in actually what the dollar value of plantations are. King Parrot Creek actually bulldoze for a start, which is not good, depending on how close you are to the riparian edge, to try and dig the whole plant out just using mechanical means.
Yeah.
They do spray. Personally, I cut and paste.
Can I add
Oh,
to
goats, yeah.
too, just
Goats.
I have some experience in the same area, and I would say that chemicals are used far too often, and there is a lot of the heritage farming mentality that contributes to that. But I know that Ron personally at most has cut and paint, but often actually ends up hand weeding blackberries. And when I first started working with him, I thought that can't be done on this scale. We're talking 29 acres with blackberry infestations everywhere, but I've seen it with my own eyes and been completed successfully.
But it's only 29 acres, right? When you start getting to, I don't know what plots you had, but you know, fields and fields.
I think borrowing goats is also a good one.
What do you pay?
Brush off.
Brush off,
Yeah,
brush
yeah,
off, sorry.
Yeah.
I just cut and just paint the little tip, right? And I've got nothing better to do with my life. I'll add that as well, right? So it's very time consuming. It's a philosophy.
I think to myself, what a wonderful